what I'm really talking about here is Citizens United, is this decision by 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court to legalize the bribery of themselves and of other politicians. And in his dissent against the Citizens United decision back in the day, this was in 2010, Justice John Paul Stevens, who was then on the court, wrote, "If taken seriously, our colleague's assumption that the identity of a speaker has no relevance to the government's ability to regulate political speech would lead to some remarkable conclusions. Such an assumption would have accorded the propaganda broadcast to our troops by Tokyo Rose during World War II the same protection as speech by Allied commanders." Well, and that's what's happened. And here, case in point, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, the maximally rich dude, the Ohio Republican senator, who dresses up his Trump-Putin toadyism in much more elegant and acceptable garb than bleach blonde, bad body beach pod, bad built butch body Marjorie Taylor Greene. By the way, Representative Crockett has now applied for a trademark for that phrase. So I have to acknowledge her whenever I use it. But anyhow, in an article for the elite Financial Times, Mr. Vance recently wrote, Senator Vance, quote, "We owe it to our European partners to be honest. Americans want allies in Europe, not client states, and our generosity in Ukraine is coming to an end. Europeans should regard the conclusion of the war there as an imperative, and Europe should consider how exactly it is going to live with Russia when the war in Ukraine is over." Right. And instead of expressing shock at such a treason weasel statement, Politico ran an article with the headline, "J.D. Vance has a point." Really? Just a week earlier, Vance had tried to convince a bunch of skeptical European diplomats at the Munich Security Conference that the United States, the largest and most powerful military force in the world, in combination with the militaries of all of Europe, all the NATO countries, does not have the ability to produce enough weapons to help Ukraine hold off Putin's Russia. Putin's Russia having an economy the size of Italy, and right now begging for discounted drones and munitions and missiles from Iran and North Korea. But Vance, came right out and said it at the conference. He said, "The West doesn't have enough munitions to support an indefinite war." Right. It's a safe bet they were popping champagne in the Kremlin when he said that, just like they did, and we know this now for a fact, in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, after the Russians had invested millions of dollars in a social media effort to get him into the White House. Then Vance goes on Face the Nation, where this is nuts. Now this is the actual dialogue is multiple paragraphs of content, but the White House boiled it down. The Biden campaign boiled it down and put it on Twitter. This was Margaret Brennan, Face the Nation. Quote, "Viktor Orbán seized control of universities and put them in foundations that were run by his allies. He rewrote the Constitution, he neutered the courts, and he tried to control the media. Is that what you're advocating for in the United States?" J.D. Vance, "I think he's made smart decisions that we could learn from in the United States." Right. Now, what is it that is allowing foreign governments to buy off politicians? Now, I'm not saying that Vance has been bought off by Russia. I'm just saying it sure does look like it. And Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and, the whole bunch, right? Donald Trump. And, as I said, when Citizens United was passed, John Paul Stevens said, this would give Tokyo Rose the same protections as the Allied commanders. He goes on to say, more pertinently, this is in his dissent, it would appear to afford the same protection of multinational corporations controlled by foreigners as to individual Americans. And that's what's going on. Now, the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism found that Viktor Orbán hired an American lobbying and PR firm. It was started by Florida Republican Congressman Connie Mack IV to promote his image to reporters and politicians in the U.S. He also hired another Republican-aligned lobbying firm to hook up Tucker Carlson with him and Hungary. To date, Orbán has spent millions in the United States promoting the idea that democracy is dead, or it's an old idea, or we should get rid of it. And of course, it's not just Orbán who's doing this. I mean, you know, China is flooding America right now on TikTok, which is owned by, you know, and run essentially by the Chinese Communist Party. The pro-Trump posts outnumber pro-Biden posts 2-to-1. And when you look at the likes that they get, and this is a reflection of the algorithm in all probability, the pro-Trump, the Trump hashtag Trump 2024 has gotten 427 million likes since January of last year, whereas Biden has gotten 50 million likes. I mean, this is essentially a campaign. Right now, there's this major corruption scandal sweeping Europe. They have discovered, the European police have discovered in a half a dozen countries, Russians buying European politicians. Now, in the United States, this is legal. This is arguably legal. But in Russia, in Europe, this is a crime. It's called bribery. I mean, we're literally the only developed democracy in the world where buying off politicians is not a crime. And that's because of 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, as I mentioned earlier. But in one case, or in multiple cases, they had European politicians who were parroting Putin's lines, mostly about Ukraine. In another case, one of them was asked to publish articles, and they did, over their name, over their byline, that were actually written by Russian intelligence operatives. And one European politician even introduced legislation that was written by Russian intelligence operatives. So Alex Findley wrote a month ago for the New Republic about this. He said it's naive to think the same pattern, and this is the pattern of Russia buying politicians, does not exist in the United States, given the ample evidence of coordinated pro-Russian talking points from several Republican politicians. Just this week, Marjorie Taylor Greene spoke to Steve Bannon about Ukraine's persecution of Christians, which is a Kremlin talking point aimed at boosting the pro-Moscow wing of Ukraine's Orthodox Church. The U.S. should be spending money on the border with Mexico, not on Ukraine aid. That's a Kremlin talking point. Russia invaded Ukraine to defend itself against an expanding NATO. That's a Kremlin talking point. Calls for a ceasefire and give Russia Crimea and eastern Ukraine. That's a Kremlin talking point. Now, we don't know how much money or other, help and influence is flowing to all these Republican politicians, roughly 140 of them in the House of Representatives, a handful of them in the Senate, including apparently J.D. Vance and a few others, certainly Rand Paul, I would say. We just don't know. And the reason we don't know is because Citizens United allows dark money to be invisible. It allows this all to happen without any disclosure. Now, when Thomas and Alito voted for Citizens United, they probably just thought they were not, they were going to prevent the gravy train that they were getting from the billionaires from stopping. Because they were legalizing bribery of Supreme Court justices as well as politicians with Citizens United. But now this has become, a cancer that is eating our society. After Trump took millions from foreign governments when he was in the White House, now you've got Democrats, they're introducing legislation this week to make it illegal for the president to take money from foreign governments. Well, it's already illegal. It's the emoluments clause in the Constitution, but they're trying to make it specific. But Citizens United is not just corruption. It's now a national security issue. And we need to overturn this thing. Congress needs to overturn this thing as soon as possible.